Good morning. We're going to be discussing genomics and genetics as they relate to public health. This will be a two-part video. I'll do the first part about genetic counseling and genomics, and then we'll move on to the second part, which is about the ethics of genetics and genetic testing for nursing. So as you can see, genetics is part of the community health assessment at both an individual as well as a population level. It's important that we as nurses understand and can really look at somebody's genetic history and its impact on their family, on their community, and as well as the population. It gives us more information and more ways to help people's health. So we will first look at a short video from genetics versus genomics from Jackson Laboratories right here in Bar Harbor.
The difference between genetics and genomics is not just the letter O. Genetics is the study of how different characteristics are inherited. Things like eye color, or anatomy, or maybe even good taste. Genes, which are blocks of DNA, control all of these characteristics. And studying a gene could reveal why a mutation might cause a disease. But diseases are complex and not often caused by single genes. Enter genomics, which studies all of an organism's genes, their genome, to find every difference, no matter how small, contributing to a characteristic. This could require going through billions of units of DNA in a population. Genomics is a young field that relies on advancing technology. But when genetics is simply not powerful enough to get to the root of a disease, genomics can step in to find a solution. The difference between genetics.
So you'll notice on the video that there is a genetic difference between genetics and genomics. Genetics being the biological study of transfer of genes from one population to another. So you might have remembered the concept from biology of a allele and a dominant gene versus a recessive gene, and how that's passed on from one family member to another. Genomics, however, involves the whole DNA strand, and it looks at how individual relationships between different links in the strand can really impact the development of disease and disease processes. And this is exactly what we look at in healthcare as well as population health. Our next video or description is really around looking at the genomics database and the ability to look at public health from a genomic standpoint. So if I look at the Centers for Disease Control, they have a very specific section of their organization that looks at the public health of genomics. And very timely, today's Valentine's Day, so we're looking at Heart Disease Health Awareness Month, which has definitely a genetic link. As you scroll down the page, you'll notice that highlighted are some issues that are pretty commonly looked at in the public health sense. And then if you look further, you'll notice the diversity of topics that are discussed under public health and genomics. Today, we're going to really focus on family history as well as genomic testing, epidemiology, and many of you have had experiences already within pediatrics and med-surg nursing that related to genomics and disease processes. So as we think about resources and building our toolkit, this particular page can be very valuable to nurses. Now, if we go to the next slide, we're going to start talking about genetic counseling. Now, genetic counseling is really a component of healthcare that is part of a screening system that helps us really identify if a family and or population has issues with a particular disease process or genetically linked disorders. So if you look at this particular photo right here, this is probably a genetic counselor taking a epithelial cell sample from the person's mouth. On this slide, we have probably a nurse taking a heel stick from an infant. And the last slide is really a simple blood test, which we often will take in cancer patients, for example, to determine if they have genetic issues related to their disease process. Our first video here we're going to look at is really looking at what it means to be a genetic counselor and what that first step of genetic counseling looks like.
Have you seen the term genetic counseling in the news lately? Or maybe your physician has referred you to a genetic counselor and you're not sure what's next? You may have questions about genetic counselors. What do genetic counselors do? When should I see a genetic counselor? What happens during an appointment with a genetic counselor? Genetic counselors have specialized education in both medical genetics and counseling. This prepares them to give you the personalized help you need when it comes to your genetic health. Today, there are thousands of genetic tests, and the number of tests available grows each year. How do you know whether a genetic test is right for you and what the results mean? Using their genetics expertise, a genetic counselor can work with you and your physician to understand your genetic risks, the tests that may be right for you, and what genetic test results may mean for you or your family. With their expertise in counseling, a genetic counselor can also provide emotional support as you make decisions and empower you with information for your overall health care. Genetic counselors can partner with you, your primary physician or specialist, and your entire healthcare team to integrate your genetic information into your overall healthcare or medical treatments. Genetic counselors work in a wide variety of medical specialties. Genetic counselors help and support patients for a variety of reasons or situations. Maria and Tim's son was diagnosed with autism. They want to know if there is a hereditary link in their families and whether any additional children may be at risk of developing autism too. Susan's mother and aunt were both diagnosed with breast cancer at a young age. Her doctor has recommended genetic testing to determine her risk for inherited breast and ovarian cancer. Linda and Joe want to start a family and they have some hereditary conditions in their family history. They would like to meet with a genetic counselor for pre-family planning to determine the level of risk for their children. After you make your appointment, you can start to prepare. Think about questions you have for your genetic counselor. Outline your family's history of health conditions. Note any questions you have about inherited risks. Think about any of your lifestyle factors that might impact your health. At your appointment, you will review your questions, family history, and inherited risks. Your genetic counselor can help you and your physician determine whether any genetic tests may provide additional information, identify the best testing options for you, and will help you understand what those test results may or may not tell you. You will also review how the results may be used along with healthcare and support options based on possible results. If you do move forward with genetic testing, your genetic counselor can help you understand what to expect. Many genetic tests are done through a simple blood sample. Once your test results are ready, your genetic counselor will help you interpret the results and what they mean for you and your family. They may discuss follow-up tests that could be ordered based on your results, or you may need to schedule follow-up appointments with your genetic counselor. You may talk about any medical or lifestyle options or family planning. To learn more about how genetic counseling could benefit you and your family, visit findageneticcounselor.com.
So as you can see, the genetic counselor really plays an important role in helping a family really understand their genetic testing options. As nurses, we are often involved in the advocacy and supporting a family and patient in getting to the point of having genetic testing and genetic counseling. So as part of that process, it's important that we recognize that there may be some ethical issues with us being nurses, and making sure that we're paying attention to these issues as we help families get to the point of having genetic counseling. So the American Nurses Association has published a document called Genetic and Genomic Healthcare Ethical Issues of Importance to Nurses. And as you look through the document, I encourage you to read it fully so that you're well prepared to be able to speak to these issues. The first thing that you need to recognize is there's 4 areas of concern ethically for nursing. The first one is privacy and confidentiality. Similar to other healthcare issues, confidentiality and having genetic information out there in the public is one area of a significant concern for nurses. So maintaining confidentiality and privacy during the process of genetic counseling and testing and treatment is essential for nurses. The second area is discrimination. Many different risks exist with genetic testing. So for example, once a disease has been identified as a person having a significant risk factor, it becomes important that we protect that information and prevent it from being shared inappropriately. Equitable access to genomic technologies. One area of concern for nursing ethically is whether or not these resources and testing is available to population regardless of their ability to pay. It's important that we think about countries that are poor, uninsured, rural, inner city communities, places that traditionally don't have access to the latest technologies and services. The other area that nurses should be concerned about related to ethics and genomics is really their access to new technologies related to rare genetic conditions. Who's going to fund that research to develop testing and technology to help support people who have very rare genetic issues? The last area of ethical challenge for nurses is really the impact of the actual genetic information itself. How is the information used, both at an individual as well as society's level, as well as their perception of that person? And how does the genetic and genomic information affect members, in particular, minority communities? I think of, for example, if we decided to genetically test people with Alzheimer's disease, and whether or not they should receive a DNR order based on that genetic diagnosis. That would be a simple example of the impact of genetic information. Is it fair and is it equitable? In addition to the everyday practice issues related to genetics and genetic testing, genomic technology, we do want to look at the research implications ethically, how the information is used. Is it going to be used to create barriers to service delivery? Is it uncovering specific issues and traits, for example, human traits that we're trying to select? An example of that would be in vitro fertilization, where you are selecting only a certain population characteristic to be developed and further created over time. And then are there cultural and religious beliefs or traditions that impact the ethical boundaries in using genomics? For example, stem cell research is one of those areas currently that is being looked at from religious tradition and cultural beliefs, and whether it's appropriate use of scientific knowledge and research in developing further information. As part of the rest of this article, I want you to just scan and really look at whether or not we have sufficient information to be able to make good ethical choices as nurses, and the importance to us of having competencies and being aware of our responsibilities in handling genetic and genomic related information. For example, it is important that we self-reflect and review our own personal beliefs and values, which may affect care that we provide to patients. We need to be able to advocate for the rights of all patients in making autonomous, informed decisions, and that those decisions are voluntary and not forced. As nurses, we also need to be very well prepared to define issues that undermine the rights of people for autonomy and informed decision-making, and providing accurate, appropriate, and current evidence that we have in helping families make good decisions. If you eventually work in a cardiac and/or oncology or pediatric unit, for example, it's very important that you understand the implications of genetics and genetic technology on a person's health. The rest of the article has some great resources for you to refer to over time. These are classic pieces of work around ethics and genomics and genetic technology, and genomic technology, and are well worth your reflection as you start your practice. So our next component, after a family has received genetic counseling and genetic, or as part of that process, oftentimes a family health history will be conducted. This can also be done upon admission for nurses, depending on what the patient's current needs are. It could be a significant finding. So, in collecting a health history, it's important for us as nurses to recognize that there's some questions we need to ask and some specific information that will help us better understand what's going on with the family. So the Surgeon General developed this family health portrait tool that can be used by anyone. That's particularly useful for families to track their own family health history. It is an electronic tool, however, it's also available in a hard copy format. If a family has concern about their information being shared, that might be an important tool to use. But it's a great way for families to track their information and understand what's going on genetically within their family history. On the right-hand side of this slide, we have a great example of the standard pedigree nomenclature as to what is used when you create a family tree. You're going to be doing that for this piece of the course assignment. So it's a very simple tree using very specific symbols, and this table gives you a great example of that. You can also go online and find pedigree examples so that you're clear in what symbol you're supposed to be using when. So for example, this one right here where you have a line through the box and the circle, that indicates that the patient has been deceased. And important for us to recognize and be able to interpret a family history. Here's the example of the hard copy of the family tool. It's a 2-page document, something very, very easy to use. On the left-hand side, you're going to just count the number of people in your family, from your parents to your grandparents to aunts and uncles and sisters and brothers. And then you're going to identify whether they have a history of any of these diseases: heart disease, cancer, breast cancer, specific types of cancer, as well as you could certainly consider diseases like diabetes, Alzheimer's disease. Any disease that has a genetic component would be appropriate to track. And then you'll just list each person and what their disease is, what their disease history is, whether they're alive or dead, and create, for this assignment, you're going to create an actual family pedigree. I will post a couple examples of student work so that you can see what the ultimate product looks like. So two-part process. You're going to actually collect your family genetic history for at least 3 generations, so at least up to your grandparents. If you want to do more, that's perfectly okay. Of note, you may not understand or know all of your family's health history. That's totally okay. Just note it on your chart. I do encourage you to call your parents and see if they have information that could help you flesh out the family health history. Again, this is a tool that we're using for classroom exercise only. It's not going to be shared, and we're going to maintain the information between you and I. Then we're going to upload your actual family pedigree chart. So you're going to create a chart from the information that you collected and upload it to ExamSoft. You should be using a PDF or a JPEG format. So if you create one by hand and take a nice picture, that would be perfectly acceptable for this piece of the project. Please make sure that your pedigree is readable and that I'll be able to understand it. Sometimes when you take a picture, it doesn't come out good, and I don't want anybody to get points off because I couldn't read it. So I will have an example in Canvas so that you know what it looks like, the final product. Or the last component that I just wanted to highlight in this section is really the ethics of genetic research and testing. There is a nice short video on making ethical decisions that you can take a peek at. Just go to Canvas and click on that PowerPoint, on that YouTube video. But I did want to just mention and talk a little bit about making an ethical decision, because I think for nursing, sometimes I think we're not making those decisions independently, and it's important that you recognize an ethical decision with a family is something that's done as a team, and there's a whole process that goes through that. Just a reminder that ethics are not about feelings. Feelings certainly play a part of ethics, but they're not the primary divisive decision-making point when you're coming to make an ethical decision. It's not a religion. It's not just following the law. Sometimes laws can be ethically corrupt, especially when there's a totalitarian regime, for example, or the law is just a function of a power or special interest of a narrow group of people. Ethics does not follow culturally accepted norms. Sometimes norms such as slavery and the Civil War are not necessarily ethical, and they can be corrupt and become blinded. And ethics is definitely not science. Science can help us make good ethical decisions, but ethics provides us reasons for how humans should act. So why is it so hard to make an ethical decision, especially around genetics and genomic testing? There are 5 standards that are used traditionally in making ethical decisions. Some of them will look familiar to you. The utilitarian approach is the ethical action that does the most good or does the least harm to the greatest number of people. The balance of good over harm is maintained. Rights approach, it protects the moral and respects the moral and ethical rights of those people that the decision is going to affect. The fairness or justice approach, all equals should be treated equally. This is a principle that oftentimes is held in high regard in the United States. Common good approach, basically life in a community is good, and our actions should contribute to that life. So looking at things like police department, fire department, healthcare, educational systems, or public recreational areas are all things that contribute to life in a community. Virtuous approach, the decisions consistent with ideal virtues that provide for development of humanity. So for example, concepts like honesty, courage, compassion, generosity, love, integrity, all are examples of virtues that can help guide ethical decisions. And then when making a decision, we often meld a number of those different approaches. So as you remember, making an ethical decision requires a framework. So the first step is really to recognize the ethical issue. What is the real conflict for the family or the patient or the institution in making an ethical decision? Get the facts. What are the known facts? What facts are not known? How can those decisions be made? Evaluate alternative actions. Making sure that we're looking at all the approaches so that one approach isn't overshadowing another approach. This is an important piece of doing a solid ethical decision-making framework. Making a decision and testing it. What is the best option for the situation that's presenting itself? And then our final step is to act and definitely reflect on the outcome. Again, a lot of these issues in healthcare are managed and worked through by a bioethics committee that usually is made up of a diversity of disciplines from medicine, nursing, social work, pastoral care, OT, PT, speech, good diversity of healthcare members, but at the focus, at the center of the decision is the family and the patient. So we're going to stop here right now. I'm going to stop the video and we're going to have a second part on which we'll just briefly talk about some resources for you as you think about genetics and genomics.